Our country's chief public health officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, says she's concerned about a 25% rise in COVID-19 cases here in Canada. Ontario saw a big spike in cases just as schools returned. To discuss this in more detail is one of our regular contributors, Mr. Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, is a lot of the country headed back towards a lockdown?
I don't think so, not on any national scale, and even a province like Ontario that's seeing an unfortunate rise in the numbers. Based on my discussions with public health officials, with the Premier, listening to what they're all saying in their news conferences, I think that if there is any sort of lockdown, it would be more of a regional type basis, where you say, okay, there's a real problem in this specific area. We're going to deal with that, because even within Ontario, 14.7 million people, biggest population in the country, it was 190 cases on new cases on Labor Day Monday that would have been reported, and then 185 on the Tuesday that kids went back to school. Now that's important because schools were shut down in Ontario on March 13th when there were only 155 cases being reported. And so I put it to the top public health doctor. I said, well, why are you opening when there's more cases now than then? He said, because at that point we were going from 20 cases to 60 cases to 100 to 155. He said the growth was exponential. Now we're seeing, after going down below 100 in the province, going back up to 150 to 200 in that range. But it tends to be people who are between 20 and 30. More than 50% of the cases recently were people between 20 and 40. So not the prime group that they tend to worry about. But they are also geographically located. So, Toronto, Brampton, the suburb just outside of Toronto, and Ottawa. And then within that, there are clusters. There was one church in North Toronto that had a bunch of cases. It was basically a spot for an outbreak. There was a wedding in Brampton where a whole bunch of people got infected. It's not wide community spread, and that's why the public health officials are concerned, but not ready to say we're going into lockdown, which I'm not sure an awful lot of the public would appreciate any longer.
You have been a harsh critic of how the Public Health Agency of Canada handled the pandemic in the beginning. Now the health minister has ordered a review of their pandemic review system because of its failure?
Yeah, a lot of concern being raised by scientists within the Public Health Agency of Canada. They said that their voices were muzzled, that they weren't heard as they tried to send warning signals up the chain of command. Now, remember, the Trudeau Liberals were elected saying we won't be like Stephen Harper. We're going to listen to scientists. And, well, it turns out that maybe they didn't. There were problems. There was a lot of problems with how the Public Health Agency of Canada handled this from the start. I've said from the beginning that the two weak points in our entire response have been provincially, in British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec especially, it's been long-term care facilities, that people were hit hard there. Federally, their response was weak early on in the border and having appropriate PPE. They didn't want to close the border. They ignored warnings that this was coming here. They didn't have the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. And now this report that there were warnings given to the government from inside the Public Health Agency. We're not talking about the Defense Department report that maybe they ignored. We're talking about within the Public Health Agency, people were sounding the alarm and officials weren't listening. So it's a bad look for the government, and more that needs to be investigated in terms of what they knew and when. Should they have been acting earlier? I think the end results or where we ended up would say yes, they should have been.
Brian, the pandemic has impacted hundreds of thousands of business owners across Canada. So many have either had to lay off staff, they've been laid off themselves because they're working for a company, or received reduced hours during the pandemic. A report from the Angus Reid Institute says low-income Canadians are especially feeling pessimistic about their economic future. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, twice as likely, especially for people making $25,000 a year or less, to say that their economic fortunes have gone down this year. A small percentage, I think it was about 25%, said, yeah, things have gone better for me this year. That's not the experience of most Canadians. Most Canadians have seen things, you're either losing hours, laid off, worried about you or a loved one being laid off. And this report shows that it is primarily people at the low end. And when you think of the last sectors of the economy to open back up, regardless of where you are in Canada, well, it tends to be places, industries like tourism, hospitality, uh, restaurants, hotels. Yeah, they're back open, but talk to the workers, talk to the owners. I know of one hotel group in small town Ontario where in the summer they rely on an awful lot of tourism. There were nights when their hotel would have one guest,
Wow.
one room at certain points. And then even as things opened back up, I remember talking to Lisa MacLeod, who's our tourism minister in Ontario. And I said, yeah, I'm hearing hotels are sold out. And they said, well, yes and no. They're sold out for what they can reasonably open and accommodate. So maybe they can only accommodate 25% of their usual business. They're sold out of that 25%. These are the industries that have been hurting. These are industries that don't, at the bottom end, don't have a lot of pay, whether you're talking about waitresses, cooks, housemaids. Then those are the people that the Angus Reid Institute survey is really showing are feeling the economic impacts of this pandemic. It's not civil servants sitting at home, some of whom have been working, even more hours. Some of them are my family members, but others are really feeling the pinch.
I've heard that as well from a lot of business owners. What's interesting, though, I just got back from a trip to Vancouver Island. The hotel that we stayed at in Victoria, jam-packed. Not an empty room in the house. I couldn't believe it. I thought, what's going on here? During the pandemic, not a problem at all. Like, it was just for them. They were making money hand over fist, which was surprising to me, right?
Very few cases on Vancouver Island. It's been one of the standouts in British Columbia in terms of how they've handled it.
Brian, our country's deficit and debt just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. The debt now over $1 trillion. The Feds have seen their credit rating cut due to the size of the deficit, over $300 billion. The PBO, or the Parliamentary Budget Officer, says the current deficit is simply unsustainable.
Yeah, and this is a frightening report where he says, look, because of all the discussions about the government doing their, Build Back Better program, their Green New Deal, all of that, there's talk of them having ongoing spending. Well, he says, look, you can't do that for more than a few years. And by a few, he said, I mean 1 or 2 at most. We're talking about a deficit this year of $343 billion. I remember when the entire federal budget used to be a lot smaller than that, and it wasn't that long ago, Hal. So it's concerning. We all understand that when the government shuts down the economy, they do have a responsibility to step in and help those who they have displaced. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing that, but at a certain point, you've got to open the economy back up. You've got to let people get back to work safely, but they have to get back to work. The way this government is talking, well, we might not see people back to work, and they might be paying them not to. To talk of a universal basic income, which will decimate those industries that don't pay a lot because they won't be able to get workers. So, I think this warning from the Parliamentary Budget Officer is one the government should heed. Unfortunately, I'm not sure they will.
How will this deficit concern affect plans being leaked out ahead of the throne speech later this month to build back better and change our economy?
I don't think it will, because remember, this is a government that was elected in the first time in 2015. They were going to have 3 small deficits, $10 billion a year, and they blew past that as if it didn't matter. And they went to 30 billion. Instead of 30 billion over 3 years, it was $30 billion deficit a year. And they didn't care. This is a government that is not the Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin type liberal. Those guys don't exist anymore. This is a liberal party that thinks the NDP wants to move too slowly in terms of government spending. They have been telegraphing that they want to do an awful lot of social spending, a national daycare program, a national pharmacare program, a universal basic income. I think that they're going to use this crisis to try and bring in all kinds of, quite frankly, socialist economic reforms that they wouldn't be able to get through in any regular time period. And the public may buy it, or at least a certain portion of the public, because I understand people are uncertain. They're scared. So, and we're not in the 1990s anymore. People aren't scared about the idea of deficits. So, sitting there and talking about, well, we've got to get back to balance, that doesn't win over voters anymore. That's not where the headspace is at. And, quite frankly, any conservative that's going to try and get elected saying, I'll balance the budget in so many years, and, that will not sell in this day and age.
New Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole has unveiled his shadow cabinet with some familiar faces, and Andrew Scheer got himself a shadow cabinet position. And Brian, Calgary MP Michelle Rempel got herself a promotion.
She's going to be the health critic or health shadow minister, however you want to put it. So I'm just waiting, because she is married to an American and she does spend some time in Oklahoma. I'm just waiting for all the critics saying, oh, yeah, she got it so that she can bring in American style healthcare. I know that critique is going to come. I don't buy it, but I'm telling you, it will be there. So she's in that position. Two guys that did outstanding work all through the WE committees over the summer, Pierre Poilievre and Michael Barrett. They get to retain their roles. Michael Barrett is the critic for ethics. He's going to be a busy man. And Pierre Poilievre is still the finance critic, while Scheer is in charge of infrastructure. And an interesting choice for foreign affairs critic, and I'm quite impressed by this, Michael Chong is going to be in charge of foreign affairs. And interesting because of his family background. His parents, trying to remember from my conversations with Michael, I believe one parent came from Hong Kong, one parent came from Holland. They're in Canada. And Aaron O'Toole is someone who's taken a strong stand against the communist dictatorship in China. That's something that Michael's been very strong on for years. And he's going to do great in that role, I think.
Brian, there was a report that our country's embassies had struck a deal to upgrade their security gear, but that contract went to a Chinese company banned by the United States over security concerns and their ties to the Chinese Communist government. Now, you've heard from the CEO of a Canadian company on this. What are they saying?
They're saying that it's unbelievable that the Canadian government didn't see a national security threat here. The company that got the contract is called NewTek. The former chairman of the company is the son of Hu Jintao, who used to be the president of China. And all these ties to the Communist Party, to the Central Command. The Americans banned this company from installing airport X-ray machines under the Obama administration in 2014. This is not a Donald Trump says China is bad thing. No, this has been going on for close to a decade, concerns about this company. And so we signed this contract. Now the government says, oh no, there's been no contract signed. That's a semantics game. What went out was a call for suppliers, and only one was put on the standing offer sheet. So anytime that they need screening or X-ray gear for a Canadian embassy, they have to go to the standing offer list. Well, there's only one company on it right now, and it's all mobbed up with the Chinese government. So a company out of Montreal, Vita Detection, their CEO, Rory Olson, is saying, you've got to change this. And by the way, we want on that list. Now, there are other Canadian companies, and there's American companies, and there's British companies that also supply this equipment. It's not a big industry, but there are suppliers from within our allies. Why we would choose a company that's been called the Huawei of airport security, a company that's able to undercut Canadian, British, or American suppliers because the government of China subsidizes them to get them into these sorts of agreements, is beyond me. The government should simply walk away from this and go with one of the Canadian suppliers or from one of our allies. The reason that the Americans, by the way, are still on a campaign, as I said, started under the Obama administration, saying you can't install this equipment in the States. Since then, they've been on a campaign to try and get it out of European airports because they say that there is potential for passenger information to be sent back to Beijing. Imagine what they would do in our embassy.
Yeah, imagine. Now, Brian, it was in May that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he was banning around 1,500 rifles from Canada to make our streets safer. A lot of farmers and ranchers I've spoken to across the prairies are not happy about it. Now, you've looked at the numbers, the hard numbers for one of the hot spots from gun crime, that being in Toronto. Has gun violence actually gone down in the big smoke?
Now it's gone up. And I only looked at the period between May 1st and September 6th, so the Sunday of the Labor Day long weekend. And, I'm trying to get data from other jurisdictions across the country. It's difficult, it's time consuming, but the Toronto Police have a data portal that you can just go in and look at neighborhoods where the crime's happening, how it's happening. The shootings went up 12.5% between May 1st and September 6th compared to the same period the year before. If you want to compare this May 1st to September 6th, 2020 to the same period in 2018, they went up 24%. And compared to the summer of 2015, just before Justin Trudeau was elected, 84%
Wow.
shootings have gone up. If these guns, if the AR-15s and these sorts of rifles were the problem, then his magical ban would have stopped the gun violence. But of course, that's not the issue here. The AR-15 is not being used. The shotguns, and yes, they're adding shotguns and bolt-action rifles, hunting rifles to the list of banned firearms. These are not what gangsters are going around and shooting up Calgary or Ottawa or Vancouver or Toronto. They're using Glocks, they're using pistols, they're using 38 snub-nosed revolvers. That's what they like because they're easy to conceal. And as one former gangster told me, he said, you want to be able to conceal it and you want to be able to throw it away if you need to. You can't be doing that with a rifle without someone seeing you pick up this big thing and try and chuck it away. So it's we knew at the beginning that this was a ridiculous measure. Now we've got a full summer of stats showing that it's not working. The government's going to spend between $600 million and $1 billion to try and buy these firearms off of the current legal owners. Why not put that money into programs to deal with some of the root causes? Unemployment, a lack of opportunity, counseling, all things that, I doubt very many people would be against, to say, gun crime is a problem, we're going to deal with it at the root cause. Instead, they see gun crime and they just say, let's deal with the guns, the legal ones, not the crime. They forget about the crime.
Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.